Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Dark and Precious Storytime. I'm Dark.
And I'm Precious.
In this podcast, we flex our creative muscles and maybe your patience by narrating original stories complete with totally professional sound effects. This will be the best 30 minutes of your life you'll never get back. Today's episode is the first of two in a series called Chloe's Light, about a young girl who uses her newfound psychic abilities along with some help from unexpected friends to vanquish the forces of evil. Chloe Turner had been able to see ghosts for as long as she could remember. Her first had been an older gentleman she later found out was her grandfather. Although she'd originally been terrified,
Yikes!
she soon learned not to fear these spirits. She'd tried to tell her parents a couple of times, Elaine and Gary, but they had only dismissed it as an active imagination and talked about how they needed to get Chloe involved in more extracurricular activities so she could make some real friends. But Chloe knew it wasn't just her imagination, so she researched online and watched all the documentaries she could find about ghosts and paranormal investigations. The more she learned about her gift, the more she realized she should probably just keep it to herself. She loved her parents dearly, but their attitudes towards psychics, spirits, or anything paranormal were at best skeptical. Over the years, she got used to seeing the occasional ghost, usually a random spirit passing through. But it was always a pretty low-key affair. The ghost would appear and hang around for a day or two, during which time they would just wander around or watch as she ate dinner or did her homework. She tried to have conversations with them, but it was always like she was talking through a closed window. They would look at her curiously without responding, as if she was speaking in a different language. After a while, she just accepted it and learned to ignore them. That is, until a few months after her 13th birthday, when things escalated to a point where she could no longer ignore it. One day, Chloe was sitting on her bed doing her homework when she heard a faint rustle.
Rustle, rustle.
She looked up in surprise to see 3 ghosts clustered in the corner of her bedroom. The first was a boy close to Chloe's age, wearing brown corduroy pants that flared out at the ankles and a light green t-shirt. He had long, dark blonde hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. A few wisps of hair escaped to frame a face with delicate features that looked like they'd been drawn in pencil. Dark hazel eyes and a small spray of freckles only served to accentuate the fair complexion. The second was a handsome man with dark, piercing eyes and a dark scruff of stubble. His dark hair hung almost to the shoulders of a battered bronze chest plate. Leather straps hung from a belt at his waist, partially covering a simple gray tunic that stopped about mid-thigh. Worn leather sandals completed the ensemble Chloe recognized as a Greek warrior's outfit. Scars crisscrossed his lean arms, which were folded across his chest. The last ghost bore a striking resemblance to her dad, and she realized it was Grandfather Paul. The last time he'd visited her, he'd been older with gray hair and wore a dark suit with no shoes. Now, however, he appeared much younger, about her dad's age, and wore faded denim jeans over a pair of battered work boots. His hair was thicker and brown, but styled as she'd last seen him, with a severe part on the left. While her dad's eyes were brown, Paul's eyes were startling blue, enhanced by a blue denim shirt. The boy stepped forward. "You need to be careful." His voice was low and husky. Chloe jumped in amazement,
Yeah!
then leaned forward eagerly. "I can hear you," she exclaimed. "Can you hear me?" The boy sighed and rolled his eyes. "Yes, we can hear you. Now pay attention," he snapped. "You need to be careful. Something's coming." Chloe cocked her head. "What do you mean?" "You're entering puberty now. Things are going to start happening and changing for you." For a horrified moment, Chloe thought the boy was going to start the birds and bees talk.
Awkward.
But he just continued. "We're here to help you, but you're going to need to learn how to protect yourself," and he waved his arms vaguely at the room. "The space you're in." "Protect myself? From what? You mean like a gun? Martial arts? 'Cause I have like a blue belt in karate,"
Hi-ya!
said Chloe. Another sigh and an eye roll. No, dummy. Spirits, and not nice ones like us, but ones that want to come through and hurt people. You're still pretty safe from the really bad stuff because there aren't any open portals here. But because your gifts only get stronger after puberty, other things are going to be attracted to you. I still don't understand. Why is this happening? Chloe asked. Both of the men shrugged, and the boy simply said, I don't know. I just know that we were drawn to your strength. That's how come you and I can hear each other. He jerked a thumb over his shoulder. They're not strong enough to speak with you yet, but probably will be if they hang out here for a while. Paul simply smiled while the Greek guy remained impassive. Well, what am I supposed to do? The boy had not smiled yet, and the seriousness of his tone, not to mention the warning itself, had Chloe worried. Figure out how to shield yourself. There's protective chants, charms, gemstones, burning herbs, blah, 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 the boy rattled off. But the best way is with intent. Focus on creating some sort of barrier around yourself, something that doesn't let anything in. Up to you how you do it, but we'll help if we can. We're going to take off now, but we'll be back. Wait! Chloe jumped off the bed as Paul and the Greek man faded away. What's your name? She asked as the boy started fading too. Faintly, she heard, Mark. Then the ghost was gone. For the next couple of days, Chloe immersed herself in more research, studying all she could find online about protection from the spirit world. There seemed to be a million different theories and techniques, but most involved some form of mental imagery, imagining some sort of protective barrier that was reinforced with personal conviction or belief. She experimented with different ideas. She tried bubbles, and then walls, and even considered a ring of fire. But, being a superhero fan, she settled on a skin-tight suit of impermeable armor that covered her from head to toe. After a few hours of practice, she was able to visualize exactly how she would activate it and what it would look like. It wasn't long before Mark's predictions came true. Doors began to slam open and close by themselves.
Slam, slam.
Cups and glasses inexplicably slid off the counters. Pictures fell off the wall and appliances and TVs turned on and off.
Click, 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 click.
And, before each event, Chloe would glimpse a small dark figure darting just out of the corner of her eye. When she'd turn her head, it would be gone, but then something would fall or slam or break, distracting her. As the days wore on, she realized these things only happened when she was home, as if the dark shadows were drawn to her. She didn't feel a sense of malevolence from the beings, but just kind of a chaotic energy. From her research, she soon identified these shadowy shapes as poltergeists, which were the spirits that seemed to manifest around young people, especially those who were entering puberty. Her parents were initially amused, joking about power surges or earth tremors. That amusement quickly turned to fear, and they stopped laughing. When something happened, they would grimly correct it without a word. If something fell, they'd pick it up. If something broke, they'd clean up the mess. If something opened, they'd close it. And this continued until one night at dinner, her dad's entire plate of food leaped off the table,
Whee!
flew across the room,
Whoosh!
and smashed through the window. Chloe had seen the dark shape a second before it happened. It was bigger than usual and had almost a humanoid form. Again, she only saw it out of the corner of her eye before the plate abruptly defenestrated. All three of them got up and went to the window, staring out at the plate lying in the yard amidst broken glass and clumps of food. Her dad turned wordlessly and returned to the kitchen to make himself another plate. By the time he sat down, Chloe couldn't contain herself any longer. Mom, Dad, this is ridiculous. We can't keep ignoring this. We have to do something, she said vehemently. Her mom nodded in agreement and cleared her throat. They both looked at Gary, who was staring down at his plate and chewing slowly.
No, 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 no.
Gary, her mom's voice had that brisk and no-nonsense tone she used when she was about to give an order. His shoulders slumped, and he stopped chewing. Gary, Elaine repeated with more force. What? What? He continued to stare at his plate. She's right, Gary. We need to do something. You should call the guy. Chloe was confused. What guy? She asked. We found a man in the city who does, her mom paused in distaste, supernatural stuff. Supernatural stuff? Like what? Chloe leaned in, interested. Oh, I don't know, but your dad found his number the other day and we've been waiting until the right time to call him. I guess that's now. Paranormal investigations, her dad said quietly around another mouthful of food. Yeah, that, Elaine said. He does paranormal investigations, looking for ghosts and whatever else they do. Elaine sniffed somewhat disdainfully and stood up, collecting her plate. He deals in weird things like this. She gestured around the room. Who is it? Chloe asked. Gary stood up briskly and grabbed his plate too. I hired Shane Damascus, he said proudly. He's supposed to be one of the best at this stuff. He's even got a TV show. It was Chloe's turn to slump in her seat. Her dad stopped, surprised. What's wrong? Have you heard of him? Yes, she'd heard of him. Shane Damascus had done a couple of shows on local TV and was rumored to be in talks to do a special on the Discovery Channel. But she was not impressed. Although he billed himself as a psychic paranormal investigator, his show is considered very little psychic reading or actual investigation. He spent most of his time on screen making dramatic pronouncements like, evil lurks in the cupboard. He taunted and heckled any potential spirits along with his cast and crew. Whenever there was an actual unexplained noise or one of their instruments detected something, the entire cast would screech and holler for the next 10 minutes. Then they'd replay the event at least 17 times on screen. Chloe started to tell her dad all this, but she saw how excited he looked, and so she just sighed and said, yeah, I'm sure he'll figure it out. A few weeks later, a tall brunette came to visit the Turners. Her name was Janet, and she was Shane Damascus's producer. Both her handshake and voice tone were brisk and businesslike as she explained how the process would work. Basically, they were expected to avoid talking to or being near Shane unless he asked them a direct question. He had all rights to any video shot inside the house, and while they weren't required to provide snacks for the crew, it would be awful nice if Elaine's parents did. Then, Janet asked him to give her a short description of the issues they were having and a tour of the house. Since they had already had the dining room window replaced, there wasn't much else to show Janet, although Elaine did take a plate out of the cupboard that was, quote-unquote, similar to the one thrown through the window. Janet just cocked an eyebrow, made a non-committal noise, and went into the living room to collect her things. As she left, Janet turned to the family and held up a hand and spoke rapidly, and recited a well-rehearsed speech. One more thing. Shane Damascus is a talented psychic, medium, and paranormal investigator, but even he cannot guarantee results every time. Your fee goes towards his time, not the results, and is therefore non-refundable. See you soon. They all stared as she walked quickly down the front walk to an awaiting SUV. Gary looked at Elaine and Chloe, smiled sheepishly, and shut the front door. Despite her distaste for the man, Chloe was excited on the afternoon they were supposed to meet Shane Damascus. This excitement turned to irritation when he showed up 3 hours late to the baseline interview. When he finally did arrive, it sounded like a small parade had pulled up in front of the house.
Dun, 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 dun.
5 black SUVs dominated the street and driveway. Their neighbors watched from windows and front porches as a small army of people in tight black t-shirts and knit caps scurried around, pulling crates of equipment out of the various vehicles. Elaine had put out a plate of cookies and a vegetable platter, and insisted they dress up like they were going to church. Gary moved to open the front door when Janet simply opened it without knocking, muttered a brief greeting, and then motioned for a group of crew members to follow her. She stomped through the house,
Stomp, stomp, stomp.
barking orders,
Woof.
and pointing at the various places to set up equipment and cameras. Meanwhile, the Turners stood huddled in the corner of the living room, smiling awkwardly. Well, Gary and Elaine were trying to smile, but Chloe simply glowered at everyone until there was a hush in the activity, and the crew members scattered away from a faint jingling sound.
Tingling.
at the front door as Shane Damascus himself walked in. Long dark hair framed a handsome face where heavy black eyeshadow and black lipstick further accentuated his pale complexion. The source of the jingling noise was the dozen necklaces and pendants hanging from his neck, along with the myriad of bracelets adorning both wrists. He wore several clunky silver rings on his black fingernailed hands. A black trench coat flared out around black cargo pants, black combat boots, and a black tank top. Tattoos wound their way across his chest and up one side of his neck to complete the goth tableau that was Shane Damascus. He strode in, face bent to his phone as he texted, and walked straight up to Janet, who was standing next to the dining room table. Chloe marveled at his ability to navigate without taking his eyes off the cell phone, then at how surprisingly short the man was. Fingers still moving across the phone screen, Shane said, "We good to go, Janet?" Janet spoke briefly into a small walkie-talkie and then said, "Corey is finishing up in the master bedroom, then we're good to go." Shane grunted and continued texting while everyone stood there in silence. "We all have cookies and a veggie plate if anyone's hungry," Elaine chirped.
Chirp.
A cheerful hostess smile plastered on her face. Janet shot a glance at her, eyes narrowed, then whispered something to Shane, who continued swiping on his phone. One of the crew members, a tall, handsome man dressed in a leather jacket, reached over and took a cookie, raising it to Chloe in a little salute. Chloe's irritation was starting to blossom into real anger when Janet's sudden clap broke the silence. "Everyone out! Move!" Once everyone filed out, Janet stood behind one of the remaining men who had a shoulder-mounted camera pointed at the front door. "Go for Shane," she said quietly. Damascus abruptly tucked his phone into an interior coat pocket and walked back out the door. A few feet past the threshold, he pivoted and walked back in, stepping gingerly into the house. Chloe watched in amazement at the difference as he jerked his head back and forth, eyes wide, hands splayed out as if he were navigating in pitch darkness instead of late afternoon sunlight. "Oh, I do not like this house at all. There is something wrong here. An evil lurks," he finished with a hoarse whisper.
Nay.
Chloe felt her parents stiffen indignantly as he shuffled through each room. He would stop at a random point in each room and say, "There's a dark energy here," or "I'm picking up something." Occasionally he'd squint his eyes in pain and say in a loud voice, "You don't scare me. You'll not have me. Back! Back, evil!" This was accompanied by him holding up a silver crucifix hanging from his neck. After about 15 minutes of this, Shane made his way back into the living room, where the Turners had taken seats on the sofa. He stopped, rushing over and dropping to one knee in front of Elaine. He clasped one of her hands in both of his. "You poor soul," he crooned. Chloe and Gary gaped at Elaine as she blushed and actually giggled. "Tell me your troubles," Shane continued earnestly. He listened intently as Elaine stammered through an explanation of the slamming doors, falling glasses, rogue appliances, ending with the flying plate. Shane shook his head in amazement and stared at the camera, saying, "Looks like we've got our work cut out for us." Suddenly he dropped Elaine's hands and stood up. "I don't know, Janet. I think I should say something more deeper, like, evil has met its match, or something like that." Janet stepped out from behind the cameraman. "You've already been talking a lot about evil. This gives us some levity, like, you've got it under control." Shane abruptly sank down to one knee and grabbed Elaine's hands again, staring into the camera. This time he grinned and said, "Ain't nothing but a thing." Then he winked. Chloe snorted at the ridiculous statement and saw the cameraman also smirking while Janet cocked her head as if she was considering it. "They're both good. We can figure out which one to use in post," she said smoothly. Shane stood up again and put a hand on one hip, fishing out his cell phone with the other. He glanced at the screen and said, "Okay, I say we take a break for dinner, then come back and shoot the spirit board scene." He paused, looking around. "In the dining room." Without waiting for a response, he walked out the front door. Janet hurried after him, pausing at the door to look at the Turners. We're going to wrap up some stuff with our equipment and be back in, she looked at her watch, 2 hours. So you can do whatever until then. Then she was gone, followed by the 2 cameramen, each munching on a cookie from the tray. The third crew member, the tall, handsome one, just smiled at Chloe again and walked out after them. Chloe stood and stomped over to the open front door,
Stomp.
slamming it.
Slam.
She looked at her parents, still sitting meekly on the sofa. That guy is such a joke. What a jerk. I can't believe people think he has any talent. Her dad shook his head and stood. I knew this was a bad idea, but we can't get our money back. He meandered into the kitchen to make a sandwich, and then let out a yell of surprise.
Surprise!
Chloe and Elaine ran into the kitchen and stopped in amazement. More than 30 cups and glasses were neatly arranged on the kitchen floor, and every cupboard door was open. Gary stooped to pick up a glass, and Chloe shouted, "Wait! They need to see this!" She turned and ran out the front door onto the porch. Janet was standing by an SUV, eating a pickle, and watched impassively as Chloe sprinted across the yard towards her. She continued chewing slowly as Chloe relayed the incident with the glasses. That's interesting. Maybe we'll get a shot out of it when we come back. But shouldn't we tell Shane about this? He needs to see it, Chloe said. Janet waved her hand dismissively. He's busy, but he'll take care of everything when he comes back. Chloe stood there a moment longer, but Janet simply took out her own phone and stared intently at the screen. I'll take a look. Chloe turned to see the handsome crew member from earlier. I'm Rob, he said. Janet ignored them both as Chloe smiled gratefully and then led Rob inside to where her parents were. He gestured to her parents in the kitchen as they walked in and said, They've been doing all the talking, but what about you? Anything else happened to you recently? She noticed for the first time that he had the most amazing blue eyes. She felt her face redden under his direct gaze and quickly turned away. Oh, I don't know. That's it, I guess. She wanted to tell him about the ghosts in her room, seeing the dark shapes around the house, but she couldn't make the words come out, so she just turned and suddenly sprinted up the stairs to her room. She jumped on her bed and buried her face in her pillow in embarrassment. After a couple minutes, Chloe heard Mark's voice and pulled her face out of the pillow. What was that? Mark asked. I don't know, Chloe said, exasperated. I just lost it. Well, you better find it, because that guy is here to help you keep this stuff from getting worse. Shane is a fraud, Chloe cried. Not Shane, the other guy, Rob. The one you just ran away from? But he's just a cameraman, she said. Mark paused. Sure. But he was also the only one in that group who actually knows what he's doing. He's on your side, too. He can help. Chloe glanced at Paul, who smiled reassuringly and nodded. The Greek guy just stood there impassively again, arms still crossed. Chloe pointed at him and said, What's his deal? Why is he here? Without looking at who Chloe was pointing at, Mark said, That's Alexios. He was a powerful warrior back in the Greek Empire or something. He doesn't say much, but he's really good at protection. But never mind him. Go back in there and talk to Rob like a normal person and get him to help you before that other idiot does something stupid. This time, the 3 ghosts simply winked out of existence. Chloe sighed, then quickly changed into a different shirt, one she thought looked better with her eyes, and ran back downstairs. Rob was standing in the kitchen watching as her parents talked in low voices and put away the last of the glasses. Everything okay, sweetie? Elaine asked when Chloe entered. Yeah, I'm good. Chloe took a deep breath and said, I have something I need to tell you. She then proceeded to tell them about her gift, how she'd been able to see the dark shapes of the poltergeists, and how they were probably drawn to her because of her age and ability. Elaine and Gary were amused at first, but grew more solemn as she spoke, while Rob just listened intently. Chloe didn't mention the 3 ghosts in her room, since she couldn't figure out a way to explain 3 men in her bedroom in a way that didn't sound totally weird. Well, I kind of figured it was something like that, Rob said, smiling. Her parents looked at each other briefly but didn't say anything. I'm going to go tell Shane. Chloe turned to go into the living room when her mother cleared her throat. Elaine glanced at Gary, who mumbled something and left the kitchen. Chloe, sweetie, her mom stepped forward, wearing what Chloe called her mom smile, and said, I know what it's like to like someone, but this is a serious situation. We need these people to focus on fixing whatever is wrong with the house. Chloe looked puzzled, so Elaine continued hastily. It's just that we don't want to distract them while we're working. Chloe cocked her head, still confused. Elaine sighed in exasperation and blurted, Please don't tell them any more stories until we get all this sorted out, okay? I know Shane is pretty handsome. Chloe heard her dad harumph indignantly from the living room. But if you keep trying to impress him, he's not going to be able to get his work done, okay? You don't believe me? Chloe erupted incredulously. You think I'm telling stories? So that what, he'll like me? That guy? Are you serious right now? Elaine put up her hands in a soothing motion, but Chloe was too angry to be placated. I can't believe that you, of all people, would think I'm making things up. Gary came back into the kitchen at the sound of Chloe's raised voice. His expression was stern as he pointed at her and said, Young lady, there's no call to raise your voice to your mother, he chastised. Chloe stamped her foot in frustration. I can't believe you two. You're okay with ghosts throwing plates through a window, but can't seem to grasp that I actually have something important to say? And you think I'm just trying to impress some guy? That is so insulting. Hot tears of anger scalded her cheeks. She pushed past her father to go up to the room. A couple of large black masses whiffed by in her periphery. She saw them positioned near the sofa a split second before it hurled through the living room window and tumbled to a stop in the middle of the yard. Her parents screamed and ran to the window.
Ah!
As everyone gathered outside, staring in amazement at the crumpled heap of upholstery on the lawn. Chloe was too furious and embarrassed to be distracted by the defenestrated sofa and stomped up the stairs to her room.
Stop.
And slammed the door.
Slam.
A few minutes later, there was a soft knocking at her door.
Knock, knock.
She slid off the bed and opened the door, surprised to see Rob standing there. You okay? He seemed sincere, but she just nodded, looking down at the floor. Hey, he said. She looked up. For what it's worth, I believe you. Sounds like your parents are struggling a little bit, but, he paused, I'm sure they'll come around. Just takes some people longer to believe than others. She nodded again, not trusting herself to say anything just yet. I'm sure you can see other things, he stated gently. She didn't question how he knew this, but nodded a third time. Inwardly, she berated herself for not using words. Sometimes. Her voice came out as a croak.
Broke.
So she stopped and swallowed. Sometimes I see ghosts. He didn't seem surprised, but only mimicked her nodding. She elaborated. Lately, I've been seeing my grandpa and a couple of other ghosts in my room. They tell me I need to learn to protect myself and that something bad's coming. Yeah, well, they're not wrong. It's a good idea to learn how to protect yourself, Rob said. You think so? Absolutely. Every little bit helps. How about we go downstairs? Shane's going to do some stuff, and I think you're going to want to see it. When they got downstairs, the lights were off, but there were several large candles burning in the dining room where Shane sat at the head of the table. A couple of cameras on tripods were pointing at him while everyone stood back. Damascus had a Ouija board in front of him, with his fingers lightly touching a wooden planchette. Janet glanced at Chloe as they came in and put a finger to her lips in a shushing gesture. Oh, spirits of the dead, hear me, see me. Come to the sound of my voice and guide my hands to tell your story. His eyes were closed. Then he tilted his head as if he were listening. Yes, come to me, spirits. Who is with us right now? Suddenly everyone gasped as the planchette began to move, pointing to different letters on the board. And that wraps up part 1 of episode 10, Chloe's Light. Join us next time to find out the shocking message revealed by Shane's planchette, whether or not any more furniture gets thrown through a window, and the final climactic battle between good and evil, with Chloe right in the middle. Until then, keep a little dark and precious in your life. We hope you enjoyed listening to our story as much as we enjoyed telling it. We're pretty sure you have more friends than we do, so be sure to tell them all about us and click to follow our podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at dark.n.precious or follow us on Facebook at Dark&Precious Storytime. Feel free to leave us any feedback or if you have any story suggestions. Who knows? You might just hear your story idea come to life in the next episode of Dark&Precious Storytime. I'm Dark.
And I'm Precious.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.